So the flicks in the array all have IDs and names, right? Sooner or later, it might be nice to be able to figure out which LI goes with which item in the array. And we could do it by name, but that seems error prone. So let's do it by ID. So somehow I need to store the ID on the actual LIs in the DOM. I don't necessarily need them to be visible. Right, the user doesn't care about those IDs. Those are just for our use. But it'd be nice if it were in the DOM somehow. Anybody know how to store a piece of data on a DOM element? Put it in an attribute. Yeah. And a common way to do that is to use a data attribute. So don't copy this. I'm just demonstrating. I could put an LI in here and just make up an attribute called like data dash anything, really. Data dash ID equals 9 or something. Why wouldn't I just set ID equal to 9? Well, strictly speaking, IDs aren't supposed to begin with a numeral. They have to begin with a letter. It might work if you begin them with a numeral, but according to the specification, it's illegal. So we don't do that. Besides, it's a piece of data. It's not an ID that we're using in CSS, right? So you can do something like that. There's a property of DOM elements called dataset that you use to change these things. Let's look at that. Let's go out to developer.mozilla.org. Let's look up dataset. HTMLElement.dataset, not SVG element. Dataset property in the HTML element provides read-write access to all the custom data attributes, that is, data dash whatever, set on the element. So these days you can put custom attributes on elements anyway. At one time, you couldn't. It was illegal. Wouldn't work. So before custom attributes were introduced, data attributes were introduced. And this dataset object gives us a way to interact with those via JavaScript without having to use the normal mechanism of messing with attributes. So the name of a custom data attribute in HTML begins with data hyphen. Can only contain certain characters, much like variable names. And then to access it in JavaScript, you use the same name except you use hyphens instead of camel casing. Use camel casing when you're doing it in JavaScript, just like CSS. So, in other words, if we had data dash pancake dash breakfast in JavaScript, we would refer to that as pancake breakfast, like that. How do we access them in JavaScript? So it's going to show us here, accessing values. Okay. Can be set and read by using the camel case name, like an object property of the dataset, as in element.dataset.keyname. So when we're rendering the list item, we have our item here. In addition to setting the text content, it sounds like we could say item.dataset.id equals flick.id, and that would do it. Let's see if it's true. Yeah. So the purpose of what we're doing is just so that the DOM element will have that ID on it somewhere, so that if we ever need to find it by ID, we can. And yes, but it's not the same ID that we use like in selectors. It's a special data-only property. We don't use it to target with CSS or anything like that. It's just a special attribute that we put on there because we want that piece of data to be floating around with that LI wherever it goes. So that if at some point we have the ID in JavaScript and we need to find the LI that matches that ID, we'll have some place to look. So we're just storing it on this special data set object So let's refresh. Slow network is detected. Yeah, tell us about it. You must be quite a detective. All right, let's inspect that. And we see data-id equals 3. Yeah.
So basically, when on the WestBoss tutorials, he was saying like if you put data dash anything, you can name anything.
That's right. You can put any data attributes you want. Yep. All right. Add the ID to the list items data set.